Well, it is very obvious that a number of our group is not here this morning. Teenagers are on a retreat and they have a number of people with them, and there's a number of other things going on. I see evidence of several people that are not back from Dallas from having wandered down there for some event that took place yesterday. And so, but we are glad that we are together. And I've been looking forward to us sharing this, because we need to step back occasionally and look at the world around us and say, okay, what's our role? Where do we fit in this? And so this morning we're talking about Christians living in a post-Christian world. Let me give a definition to that so that we might be of common understanding here. A post-Christian world is one in which Christianity is no longer the dominant civil religion, but has gradually assumed values, culture, and worldviews that are not necessarily Christian. Simply said, the purity of Christianity has been so compromised in many ways that actually it's not recognizable as Christianity anymore. Now, in the broad sense, when we talk about this in its broadest sense, Christianity is still the dominant religion in the whole wide world. More people, by more than 1 billion, more people identify themselves as Christian than any other faith system. But certainly, and especially in the West, we're starting to see the influence of Christianity decline. And that is for a number of reasons, and we're going to look at that. But simply said, Christianity is no longer respected as it once was. We are surrounded by stronger and stronger anti-Christian attitudes. And rather than living in a culture where Christianity is the dominant mindset, we're living in a society now where Christian thought is not the expected norm anymore. Christian thought is not what rules our political decisions. Christian morality is not the only acceptable morality for the society. We're living in a time when increasingly Christianity is just one of many choices in the whole religious world, including the choice to not be religious at all. The statistics in America, when you look at a large population like America has, 330 million people or so, the percentage of those that claim to be Christian has decreased by a significant number within the last 20 years. I mean, it's fallen by maybe 15%, which is a lot of people. And it's on a downward trend. There are a lot of Christians that really are not sure how to handle all this. We live in a time where one can claim to be a Christian without taking any kind of a stand, not even knowing why you claim to be a Christian. A lot of people claim to be Christian because their grandmother was. And that's not much of a reason, really. It really doesn't have a life impact. It doesn't require a commitment. It is just kind of a philosophy that's back there in the back, and yeah, it was probably a good idea, but it doesn't really affect me. And the fact that there are many Christians today that are frustrated with what they see happening, particularly in America. We see a lot of people that are frustrated because we see moral, acceptable norms changing dramatically. And what was totally unthinkable 20 years ago is now not only accepted, but we are expected to go along with anti-Christian morality. And the pressure that this puts on us as Christians is, that we need to be in the position to defend why we believe what we believe. And therefore, it requires a new step of commitment for us. And this is not a bad thing. The fact that we are surrounded by more and more people that are questioning Christianity puts us in the position of being able, in a fresh, new way, to meet the challenges that that world is setting forth. And I'm reminded of what Peter wrote in 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. We live in a world that's challenging our Christianity. And at that, Christians, we don't need to be afraid. We actually can smile at that and say, bring on the questions. Let us demonstrate why we believe what we believe. Today we're going to look at 3 questions and spend by far most of the time on the first one. Is there really anti-Christian bias in America? Secondly, is there persecution of Christians in America? And third, how should Christians live in a post-Christian society? So let's just look at some things. Is there really anti-Christian bias? Or are we just dreaming that? A man by the name of George Yancey wrote a book that I've not read the book. I saw this referenced and I'm drawing some things from it, but it's got a great title. The title of the book is So Many Christians, So Few Lions. But he points out something really powerful here. 32% of all Americans like conservative Christians significantly less than other social groups. Got that? 1/3, basically, of our society looks upon conservative Christians and identifies them as people that you like less than other people. Now, in a comparison, how do you think our society looks at the Islamic world? Interestingly, 31% of all Americans like Muslims significantly less than other groups. There are anti-Christian attitudes that are being displayed in very, very powerful ways. And let me tell you where they come from. The most powerful statements and attitudes against Christians are arising from white, male, wealthy, highly educated, politically progressive, irreligious individuals. Got that? Now the significance of that is this. That group, who do they have influence over? And I would point out in our society, that group has significant influence in our media and in the academic world. What it means is that what these individuals, what these men want us to hear through the media comes through this strong bias against Christians. And what is being taught in college campuses, on college campuses, is being influenced by these people who want to influence people in an anti-Christian way. So the question has to come along. All right, so there's these guys that don't like conservative Christians. How strong is that? Is that just a mild dislike, or is that irrational hatred? There was an interview that this George Yancey did, a questionnaire that was given to a group of these men. Here's some of the quotes that he got back. Now, these are quotes having to do with conservative Christians. This is us, folks. And these are the attitudes towards us. Number 1, kill them all. Let their God sort them out. How about this? A torturous death would be too good for them. I'd be a bit giddy, certainly grateful, if everyone who saw himself in that category were snatched permanently from our societal peripheries, whether by Holocaust or rapture or plague. Or finally this, I am only too well aware of their horrific attitudes and beliefs, and those are enough to make me see them as subhuman. I think somebody doesn't like us. Are we surprised that we see an anti-Christian bias in our society when people who have this vehement attitude towards conservative Christians are the ones that are controlling our media and are controlling what's happening on university campuses? In the world of academics, roughly half of the people that are involved there are very willing to discriminate against job applicants who are conservative Christians. In the media, there's less sympathy to stories where conservative Christians are victims of hate speech or violence than if other groups face the same opposition. There are these people that are promoting an anti-Christian bias. So let me share with you some examples of anti-Christian bias in our country today. A Colorado bakery was forced to close because they refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Note a couple of things. They were not refusing to give service to this couple. They were simply refusing to participate in the wedding, and because of that, they were taken to court. They were found guilty, and they ended up losing their bakery shop. In and out of courts and appeals, it was taken to the Supreme Court, and actually the bakery finally won, but not until after they'd lost their business. Chick-fil-A has been identified as homophobic for giving support to traditional marriage. There are some cities in America that have refused Chick-fil-A the right to even submit an application for building a business in their city because of this attitude. They don't like Chick-fil-A's stance on traditional marriage. Chick-fil-A has been refused to allow stores to be built on college campuses in a number of places because of this stance that Chick-fil-A is anti same-sex marriage. Our Vice President Pence, has come under attack because his wife teaches at a Christian school that holds conservative views about marriage and sexuality. In a New York Times, this is startling, in a New York Times editorial, there was a criticism of Mike Pence being on the Republican ticket for the 2016 election. And in the editorial, it said this: most Christians are religious bigots who oppose freedom for others. New York Times editorial. In our society, anyone who speaks out opposing abortion on religious grounds is seen as waging war on women. Frank Zappa, which is an interesting person to quote in a sermon, okay? Frank Zappa, he's a rock star. He was speaking at a pro-abortion rally in Los Angeles. He said this: when you see that Christian fish symbol on the bumper sticker on the car in front of you, you know that is the enemy. Hollywood and television and Broadway enjoy making religious people look like ignorant and hypocritical individuals. There are ongoing efforts to extract God from our nation's founding fathers and the documents they produced in an effort to carry the separation of church and state to the point of establishing such a separation that no element of faith can be acknowledged in any public setting. There's such a demand that some are choosing to reinterpret our freedom of religion and change it to a freedom from religion. A teacher in New Jersey was suspended for giving a student a Bible. A football coach in Washington was placed on leave for saying a prayer on the field after a game. The fire chief in Atlanta, Georgia, was fired for self-publishing a book defending Christian moral teaching. A Marine was court-martialed for pasting a Bible verse above her desk. Evangelical schools like Gordon College in Massachusetts and King's College in New York have had their accreditation threatened. Student groups like InterVarsity have been kicked off campuses. There are demands that crosses on public buildings and displays of the Ten Commandments be taken out of public view. In some history classes, Christians are made to be the violent aggressors at several points in history, including the settling of America. And in science classes, any attempt to even discuss ideas about intelligent design are met with opposition and sometimes hateful and divisive backlash. Is there anti-Christian bias in America? I think there is no question. And we are facing it more and more. And for those of us who are collecting a lot of years, we don't face it nearly as severely as our kids will, and even more so our grandkids. This anti-Christian bias is a pressure for those who claim to be Christians to make a proclamation within their own lives as to what they're about. It used to be easy. It's going to become more and more challenging. And so the second question, is there persecution in America? There would be some that would say yes, because of all the things that I have mentioned. But let's be rational here. Let me remind you of what is said in Hebrews 12:4. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. We as Christians, we look around at bias against us, and we've got to be very, very careful. We must resist the temptation to think that any opposition that we face is a persecution. We must not look upon ourselves as victims. There is not a single philosophy in the worldview, there's not a single individual outside of Christ that any of us should ever be jealous of. We are holding a position of following a God-given philosophy of life. And in that we need to be very proud. We are not victims. We may not be understood. There may be bias against us, but we're not victims. And we're certainly not paying the price as others are and have for their claim to be Christian. You just compare what we experience with real persecutions in history and even currently in other countries. Did you know, for instance, on an average, there are 11 Christians every day that are killed because of their faith? That's not in America. That's in other places. We have not yet come to the point of shedding blood. Please don't think of yourself as a victim. Don't think of us as victims. There are those that are being persecuted. What we are facing now should not be called persecution. Bias, yes, let's understand that. But we have a long way to go before what we experience is being called persecution. And I would remind you also, when we face challenges, when the world comes up against us and wants to oppose us, let me remind you what James wrote. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So, third question, how should we as Christians live in a post-Christian world? Actually, the scripture is pretty plain. It gives us some guidance. Let me read to you, first of all, Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay hold of every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. We have available to us the power to overcome, but we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, not on an antagonistic world. Or perhaps we read from 2 Corinthians 4, 7 through 11, what I just read to you in our scripture reading. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not despairing, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body the dying of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our body. For we who live are constantly being delivered over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. Are we facing opposition? Indeed, we are facing opposition. But does that destroy us? In no way does that destroy us. We are challenged, but it's okay to be challenged. And then I want to share with you one other thing, and I didn't write the whole thing out because it's a lengthier passage, but I want to read you just a few verses here from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. If we're serious about being like Jesus, following Jesus, listen to this and compare it to the opposition from the world. You have heard that it was said, Jesus speaking, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Does the world treat us badly? Sometimes. Might we experience bias against us? Certainly we may. So how do we react to that? Well, we react like Jesus told us to react. And if they would slap us with an insult, we don't fire back at them. If someone wants to discriminate against us in some way, we don't have to be in ugly opposition. As a matter of fact, we should stray away from that, because in doing anything on our human knee-jerk reaction level, we'd be acting just like the world. He's not asking us to be like the world. He's asking us to be like him. So just a few other points. We need to understand that our role in living our faith, our role in living this faith, we are living it as we are surrounded by people who are comparing us to others. If Christianity comes under examination today, understand that there are those that are saying, okay, here's Christianity, here's Islam, here's Buddhism, here's whatever else, and we can all go down the line of world religions. They're going to compare us to others. To that I say, that's wonderful. Bring it on. Let the world honestly look at and let us honestly defend the faith that has been handed to us. We live in this world. We are representatives of one worldview. A worldview is simply the philosophy by which people live. And everybody has their own worldview. We represent one. Now, I would also say this. We are also the representatives of the one worldview that is most consistent, most backed by evidence. It works across cultures and across time, and it demonstrates that it was given by God. Now, that very statement that I just made, there would be those that would just rave in opposition to that. What gives you the right to say that you guys have it better than the rest of the world? The reason that I say that is because Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and no man comes to the Father but by him. We have a superior worldview, and we can prove it, not just by our opinions, not by our biases, but by what has been given to us. We can stand up and give an answer. And I would remind you of what John 18:36 says, when Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." The Christians, stop fighting like we are fighting an earthly enemy. The opposition that we face is from Satan himself. And greater is he who lives in us than he who lives in the world. So what else might we do? There might be some of us, certainly some of our kids, grandkids, who might want to be involved in media or in academia to see what a difference that they can make. There's no guarantees that we can really change things, but our presence there could be very valuable. But here's the big thing. We must live the message that we preach. If we want to really stand up against the opposition of the world, we cannot be seen as hypocrites. We've got to live out our faith and thus do the things that Jesus said to do. Be the people that Jesus is leading us to be. We must stand up and honestly live the message. And then we must defend the faith. That's what Peter was telling us to do. Be ready to give an answer, an apologia, a defense of the faith. And our faith, folks, our faith is defendable. We can defend it against all the other worldviews. We can give the evidence why Christianity is the workable system of the world, why it is the superior system. We don't need to be afraid of that. Now, it puts work on us, but that's what we're here for. As we live out the message of Christ, let us also defend the faith as being significant as it was designed to be. We have reasons to believe why we believe what we believe. We're not striving to be arrogant in a cult-like belief system, but we're representing the very plan that God has set in place among all humankind. He has given us the opportunity to be honest followers of him. So, one more thing. After all this, I believe that there is an overwhelming attitude that we are to display. There is to be an attitude that says to the rest of the world, this is our reaction to the bias against us, and even if it would get to that point, to open persecution against us. You know what that attitude is? So, what if they want to oppose us? What if they want to display bias against us? What if they would even get to the point that we would suffer persecution in this country? So, it doesn't mean that we back down. There are political threats against us today. Even this week, a political candidate said that he is in favor of taking away a tax-exempt status from churches if they do not support same-sex marriage. Does that mean that we are going to capitulate to that? No, not at all. What if they would threaten us and say, we're going to come in and close you down if you don't preach what we want you to preach? To that we would say, so? Because they cannot touch us. They could, even to an extreme, take our very lives, but they cannot touch our souls. And therefore, what do we have to worry about? We are not intimidated by a biased world. We are rather strengthened by the opportunity that we have to honestly stand up and demonstrate who Jesus is and what the body of Christ is all about in the world today. In the very worst case situation, if we came under the threat of death or imprisonment, we don't bow down to the forces of compromise or even to the forces of evil. Why? Again, because greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. What this means is that it's time for us, each of us, to honestly pick up our cross and follow after him in spite of where it leads us. The great example in the Old Testament of faith, the father of faith, is Abraham, who was told by God, get up and leave and go, and I will show you where you're going to go. And he got up and left, not knowing where he was going. Where does our discipleship lead? We don't know. What does standing up for the purity of Christianity, where does that lead us? Don't know. Does it lead us to having conquering moments? Perhaps. Does it lead us to persecution? Perhaps. But we follow him because we are disciples of Jesus. We pick up our cross and we follow after him. And so it comes down to this for us. It's a very introspective look. Each one of us looks at our relationship with God. Our relationship with Jesus the Christ. Are we truly going to seek after being disciples of Jesus? Are we putting our faith in Jesus? If we are, then understand there will be opposition. So what? We have Christ and his majesty to stand for. That is our calling. If we fall short of that, then we are betraying our very cause. If we choose to capitulate to a politically correct world, then we have become a part of post-Christian society. But while we are living, if we are so determined, the cause of Christ will not be compromised. And if it leads us even to death, so be it. Because our God is great enough to carry us through that. What an honor it is to be followers of a God-given plan. The world is biased. So be it. But the cause of Christ will live if we live it. The question is, are you living it? Are you compromising? It's time for some of us to step up and to be counted as people who are truly disciples, not just as religious, not as churchgoers, but as disciples of Jesus Christ. If we can help you in this journey that you are taking, let us help you right now. Come, let's stand and sing.
Lord, make me a servant. Lord, make me like you. For you are a servant. Make me one too. Lord, make me a servant.